Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Copilot for Microsoft 365, What We've Learned After 1 Year, featuring two amazing Microsoft MVPs, Zoe Wilson and Luke Evans. My name is Vlad Caprinescu. I'm Syskic's technical evangelist and a Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. Now, most of you may already know Syskic as a company, but for those who don't, let me briefly introduce you. Syskit is a software development company founded more than 14 years ago. We develop products for Microsoft 365 governance and security, as well as for SharePoint on-prem administration. We have more than 3,500 customers around the world, ranging from small businesses to large corporations, and we have four different products, including our award-winning SP Docket for SharePoint On-Prem, as well as our flagship product, Syskit Point for Microsoft 365 Governance, which helps organizations get Copilot ready. Before we get started with the awesome presentation, just a few housekeeping items. All registrants will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days after the presentation. If you ever need to drop off for an emergency, or you just find the presentation so awesome that you have to share it with your colleagues, please do so. Please take that YouTube link and share it with anybody that you think might find this interesting. After the presentation, Carla from Syskit will give a short demo that will show you how Syskit Point can help you get Copilot ready. And of course, at the end, we will have a Q&A session where Zoe and Luke will answer any question that you might have. So please use that QA function on the right side of the screen to ask your questions throughout the webinar. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Let me start with Zoe. Zoe Wilson is a senior director at Avanade, a Microsoft MVP, as well as a Microsoft regional director, and as you're about to see for yourself, an amazing public speaker. Zoe brings together several years of technology leadership and experience over 15 years of working with collaborative tools such as SharePoint and many other Microsoft technologies. Next up, we have Luke Evans, a Microsoft MVP and solutions architect with over 16 years of experience, especially when it comes to architecture and full end-to-end delivery of cloud digital transformation programs. He's currently focused on Microsoft 365 services and the technologies that underpin and support them, with a strong focus on security and identity. I'll now give a warm welcome to our presenters. Zoe, Luke, are you ready?
Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, take it away.
All right, lovely, lovely. All right, fantastic. Hey Zoe, how you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Luke. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely on fire. Very excited to be here.
I can't believe it's
So,
been a year since the last one of these.
I know. But I mean, what a great title, eh? For it exactly a year's follow on, eh? So Microsoft 365 Copilot, what we've learned after 1 year. We got a brief kind of agenda of what we plan to cover. Now, Vlad, thank you for hyping us up. I'm not sure we can follow that in terms of an introduction. I feel like we've been suitably hyped up, but we typically just have a slide or two on who we are. We want to talk about the value of Microsoft 365 Copilot. Then my favorite part, this is where I will come in the most, is security considerations. So I kind of talk through what are some of the key things that you want to look at in terms of, I guess, security points to roll out kind of Copilot. Zoe is I would say the Copilot queen, so she will be hammering these ones. I'm very excited to hear what she's got to say on these, and then kind of what comes next. You know, what will we say is next up? So I don't know if you got any ones to add there, but I think we just have the usual stuff on the far right. I think, like Vlad said, this is a brief overview of what we plan to cover. If you've got any questions, please chuck them in, and we'll cover them at the end if that's all right. I think there's a dedicated Q&A section, like they said.
Yep, sounds good to me. Let's just get into it.
All right, lovely. I will just very briefly. Yeah. like Vlad said, I'm actually a dual MVP in security and identity and Microsoft 365. So those are my areas of interest. Ex-Microsoft, I work a lot in policing in the UK, so highly secure organizations, and that's kind of the last 5-6 years of my life is the one.
Brilliant. So I'm not so much on the security side, but I currently work at Avanade in a technical business leadership role. I've been working with Copilot for about 15 months now, so leading the go-to-market for Copilot at Avanade. We actually won Copilot Partner of the Year, which was fantastic. I'm also the co-host of a Copilot podcast as well. So talking with a fellow MVP about everything that's going on in the Copilot world, and really excited to share with you what we've learned over the last year and where we really see this going.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough for me to compete. Zoe's definitely got more Copilot than me. I'm hopeful I can bring my A game when it comes to security and what I would look at for kind of setting it up so you're ready to rock and roll with Copilot. But I think when it comes to Copilot, you're going to be tough to beat. Zoe is the one.
Okay, so let's start with the value of Copilot. And actually, if you move on to the next slide, Luke. So this was a slide that we presented when we did the Copilot and what you need to do to get ready webinar with Cisco last year. And when I was looking through the content, it was really interesting because these were the things that we thought Copilot might do. And these are the things actually that we've seen in terms of the personal productivity benefits. So we've at Avanade, we've done a research project internally. We've been doing lots of these value measurement things with clients. The big question, because this is a premium license, is around that. What is the value of it? What does this actually mean to me as an individual? What does it mean to me as an organization? And when we think about this in the context of personal productivity, all of these things are absolutely true. We've had people telling us that it has decreased the skills gap. So you might have some people in an office who know how to do all of the whizzy things with Microsoft 365. What people with Copilot have told us is that it helps them be able to compete on the same level without necessarily knowing how to do those things. And people telling us, that they feel more creative, that they've got reduced cognitive load, that they can problem solve more effectively. So when we think about personal productivity, I think the value for Copilot is definitely there. And if we just move on to the next slide, I think, it's really helpful just to kind of ground why some of this is important. Now, if you are not aware of WorkLab, I definitely recommend that you go and take a look at the site, because periodically Microsoft release these work trend index reports, and it's all research based, and they look at the impact of work, the future of work, all of those kinds of things. And the link on the slide at the bottom, what this is showing is one of the latest reports from earlier this year, where nearly 70% of people are saying that they struggle with the pace and volume of work. So we've just got too much work to do and it's going too fast. And nearly half of us are feeling burnt out. We're getting too many emails. We've got too many meetings. We don't get enough time to actually spend on the creative things, on actually creating things of value. And then for people who are neurodivergent or physically disabled, this impact is even worse for them. It's a bigger lift for them to be able to operate on an equal playing field with everyone else. And then moving on to another one of the work trend index reports on the next slide. So this is looking specifically at the impact of AI, and more than 90% of people are saying AI helps them save time. Another really interesting stat as well, when you think about Copilot, is 75% of knowledge workers are saying that they're using Gen AI tools, even if their company doesn't provide them. So what that means is, for organizations where they maybe haven't got started with Copilot yet because they don't know how to, or they're worried about the risk or the impact, you've got people in your organization who are using ChatGPT or using Copilot in Bing or, any of these other tools to help them work smarter. And that's a security risk. I can see you laughing at that one, Luke.
Well, I tell you what, this is one of the ones I always say is usability versus security. And I mean, one of the things I often say is, look, it's better to have it taking place where you can control it rather than it sprawling out. And if people really want to share files, for example, they'll find another way to do it. They'll circumvent kind of the controls in place. And I see it here as well, because I know a lot of friends that they don't have Copilot, they don't have generative AI solutions at their workplace, and they'll just go, like Zoe said, and crack on with ChatGPT. There's nothing really stopping them, is the one. So yeah, I'm on board with that, definitely.
Yeah. So what that means is, if you're not already using Copilot, you need to think about how you position these tools in a safe and managed way. And when we look at the benefits or the value of Copilot, nearly 90% of people are saying that it's freeing them up to focus on more important work. A similar number saying it's allowing them to be more creative. They're enjoying their work more. It's helping people get to a good first draft faster. When I look at some of the stats that came out of the research I was involved in, we also saw that for people who are using Copilot every day, they were nearly 70% more successful in finding work-related answers, and they were 50% more adept at switching between tasks. And for those of you who understand the impact of context switching on productivity, if you're focused on something and you have to switch to something else, it can take you as long as 25 minutes to get back into the flow of it again. So being able to switch to new tasks more effectively is a real benefit. They were saying that they resolve blockers 40% more quickly, experience 31% less cognitive fatigue, able to focus 30% better. So from a personal productivity perspective, I think it's clear that the value is in Copilot.
What about the 11 minutes one, Zoe? That's the one that stood out. Is that all that you're looking for? What does that one mean? I don't know.
So yeah, so that's from a report. I don't think this isn't the link on the slide. That's from a different report on the WorkLab site, which is I think it's called the AI tipping point. And what they said in this report is that for individuals to be able to feel like they've got value from Copilot, it takes 11 weeks. And they need to free up at least 11 minutes per day, and that's kind of the magical tipping point where people start to feel like there's something in this, and they become invested in what AI and Copilot can do for them.
Awesome.
Now, this the topic of value has 100% been where I've probably spent most of my time talking to clients in the last year. And when we think about why this matters, I've already mentioned the fact it's a premium license. List price, $30 per user per day. If you've got a lot of users, that can get to a big number really quickly.
Oh, sorry, just a quick one. You said per day? Do you mean per month?
I'm sorry, per month, yeah.
I was worried there myself. I was like, holy smokes.
Yeah,
I'm not looking forward to that.
Per user per month, yeah. So what that means is that it's really important for organizations to ensure that the people who get licenses are actually using them, that they're giving them to people who will actually find benefit from them, and that they understand what their strategy is and what level of Gen AI solution is right for different types of personas or users in an organization. And there are lots of organizations in lots of different industries who talk about being an AI first organization. They want to be Gen AI powered. They can really see the potential for how this is going to transform their business. But when you move straight to building custom co-pilots from a data and AI perspective, it can start to get complex quite quickly. So one of the things that I've seen work really well is that getting Copilot into the hands of people is a really effective first step on becoming Gen AI powered, because you're giving people these tools in the apps and services that they use every day. It's one of the quickest and safest ways. You've got all of the Microsoft Enterprise Security controls, and it allows you to start working with them on building the habits. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the change enablement and adoption. What we want is people to change their behaviors, and that behavior change is really hard. Like if I look at the way I work, my productivity habits, I've developed these through my entire education and working career. And changing behaviors is really hard. So again, starting with Copilot and then understanding how you can extend and build from that into more complex and high value use cases, I think is a really good first step. And the potential is significant, you know, for organizations who can get this right and who can help individuals start getting the benefit of those personal productivity savings or improvements, and then look at what you do next. That, you know, there is a really significant potential, but because of the big price ticket, it's really important that organizations actually understand how they get from buying a license to actually realizing that potential.
Mhm.
And then, so, you know, if I've talked about both personal productivity and business value, and when we think about the benefits of Copilot, these two things form that magic equation. So, you know, personal productivity is me as an individual learning how to integrate Copilot into my daily habits so that I can be better and faster and more efficient and more creative. And then as I get that foundational knowledge in place, then we can start to look for the business value where Copilot can be used across functions and processes, and we can start to integrate with other data and systems. And then as we start to bring in that business value, that will drive personal productivity, and that continues to drive business value. So it creates this really nice circular effect where we're continuously making these incremental gains in value. And just to bring this to life a little bit, you know, if I think about this in my context, you know, I can use Copilot to capture insights from meetings, and it can help me take the output of those meetings and turn them into quality documents more quickly. So getting to that good first draft faster. But then when we think about this in terms of business value, if I can start to use Copilot to take data from my CRM and then use that data to help me create things like personalized sales plans or content specific to clients, again, that's helping me get to a better result faster, but in a more business context rather than just productivity, freeing up my time to spend with them. And this is, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's going to be so many ways to bring content into Copilot and to drive business value. But it really all starts with that personal productivity foundation.
Cool. Awesome. Over to my part. This is my favorite part of the area, you know, security considerations for rolling out Copilot securely. Now, Zoe, you're gonna have to keep me honest here on this one in terms of I've kind of break it down from a, you know, why should I be concerned, you know? So I know you mentioned Microsoft's enterprise security tools, security controls, you know, we've got those safeguards in place, but why should I be concerned about from a, maybe, you know, a system administrator, from an architect standpoint, what is it that I need to be concerned about? And I'm kind of working from the top and going round here on this one. So Copilot indexes data from various sources across your tenant by default. So when you switch it on, it's going to start indexing mailboxes, SharePoint sites, Teams chats, other sources across 365. Now, one of the very important things is it respects existing access controls and Microsoft 365 compliance policies. Like Zoe mentioned, they're already there. It's respecting them. So a user should only be entitled to see what they're able to see using Copilot. So I'll need to have access to a document, to a SharePoint site, to a library, whatever it may be, to be actually able to kind of use that in Copilot is the important thing. So the key takeaway there is it respects existing access controls is what I'm trying to get at. So users are free to query their own data, based on that previous one. So I can go query something about my emails from specific contacts or documents that I've worked on and so forth, but it won't allow me to go say, if I wanted to say, I want to go read Zoe's emails, it respects those existing boundaries. Now, what is of interest here? So we've got the access controls in place, they're respecting existing permission sets. I think the key here is really inadvertent access to sensitive files and documents is the important thing. So things that I might not know I have access to is the important thing. So I might be able to surface content that I didn't know I had access to because it's been improperly shared, it's been overshared and so forth. And at that point, I can bring that in and start utilizing that within Copilot. I think one of the key things is we want to avoid sensitive data getting out there is the important thing. So we don't want to be able to access, HR documents, IP, or, company IP, financial information, medical records that might be stored within the tenant and might have overexposed permissions. And I think that leads us to, why should I be concerned? What is the business impact of these documents getting out? So if things were improperly shared and you could access them in Copilot, what is it that could actually happen? What if someone got access to, payroll records? What if someone had access to key IP or, the company accounts, for example? That's kind of setting the scene. And I think one of the things, the key thing there for me was kind of oversharing, extravagant permissions. I think that's a bit over the top, but I had a quick look to see, and I pulled this one out of Microsoft, which is kind of the state of cloud permissions. Now, this is specifically around, cloud platforms as opposed to M365, but it helps kind of set the scene for, oversharing is the one. So this is across Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, and, in a multi-cloud environment, you've got 40,000 plus permissions to manage is what they found. So it is a very, very high amount of permissions to manage. This one was probably my favorite of the thing, was like the permissions that are actually granted, only 1% are actually ever used. So you've got a heap of permissions that have been assigned, but they just aren't actually used. So just imagine,
that doesn't surprise me one bit.
Just imagine the 99% are sat there that are dormant, that aren't really being utilized, and people don't really know what's going on with them. And Microsoft carried out over 500 risk assessments on these cloud environments, and they found that most identities are greatly over-provisioned. So people have a lot more than they're entitled to. There was an additional stat around super admins, but I didn't feel like that's really necessary in the context of this is the one. But I think it was over 50% of users on these tenants are considered super admins, which was crazy to me. But it doesn't really hold weight in 365. But these were the ones that really stood out to me in terms of extravagant levels of permissions, over permissioning, and so forth. What can you do about it? I think I pulled together a few areas that I would probably start at, and then I've looked at key ways of breaking it down, key technologies of things that I would go and look to do. Classify. So at the moment, I think the question to ask yourself is, how does your organization define, data that is sensitive is the important thing. What things would I start? I mean, to classify, I'll come to kind of the technology piece in a second. But for me, I would start looking at kind of, where is your data stored in 365 in terms of sensitive data? Do you know where it is? What kind of types of sensitive information are you storing? And, what is that business impact of that data getting into the wrong hands? I think for me, the very first is, that if we're looking at the who, what, why, where, how, I mean, we've got to start with, what is it that we actually have that we need to protect is the important thing. Where does this data live? And what is it about, and how can we protect it is the one. This one, how does your content, and this one's a fairly common one that I see all the time, is, do you know the flow of data within your organization? And the question is, I know where content is typically created, people are ingesting it, they're making it, they're copying and pasting it. One of the key ones is, how is content disposed of? And, again, not just permissions, but data that has been left there that's no longer required, isn't being utilized, and it's just sat there dormant. It could well be redundant, obsolete, trivial. It's no longer needed. Is there proper kind of procedures in place for disposing of data is the one. So where does your data exist within your organization? I think what I would start with is, again, it's a following on from the classification, but I would start with the key departments in your company. So things might be HR, it may be IT, it may be finance, are some of the key areas. Identify their key 365 areas. So is that a team? Is that a SharePoint site? Let's audit these locations and have a look to see if, what are the permission sets? How does that look like? And I'll talk about how I might do that in the next one. But the other key one is, are there any areas that should be strictly off limits? So when we're looking at extremely sensitive data and what Copilot can access, are there any areas that should be strictly off limits that we want to exclude entirely? I think the other key one is access, how users granted access, not just sensitive data or documents, actually access to sensitive data or just data in general is what I was trying to say. What are your existing sharing policies within your Microsoft environment? How do you share data within your environment? And is there any sort of regular audit or review of existing permissions in there? And I mean, that's probably what can you do? This is just some high level steps around what I would do. In terms of tooling, what would I do? Let's go have a look. I mean, classifying your data. one of the key things that we have available in 365, I mean, I would look to start classifying sensitive information. We can use sensitivity labels, and they're kind of, they're really quite, I would say, they've expanded a great deal over 365 is the one. So they used to be fairly small in scope, but they're pretty much everywhere is the thing. What is a sensitive label?
If I just add on kind of, one of the things that we've definitely learned or seen in the last year as well, with some of the clients who started using Copilot, first of all, there was a lot of feedback to Microsoft that Copilot wasn't respecting sensitivity labels, and it wasn't taking, if it was reviewing labeled content and then creating something new, it wasn't respecting the label on that content. So one of the things, I mean, I think this is a really great place to start. One of the things that I've been really pleased to see is how much of that feedback Microsoft have taken on board, and the fact that, Copilot will actually respect the things that we do here.
Yeah, and I think not just the label itself, but sensitivity labels are used for applying and enforcing data protection policies. So it may be that you want to deny access to Copilot, or you want to limit access to specific people on an individual document. We can do that using classify sensitivity labels as the important thing. It's widespread. We can use them natively across, the standard Office documents and PDFs. So my key takeaway here is, even if you start simple, it would get into the practice of kind of classifying your data in terms of sensitivity labels and start getting that out is the one. So it may be that you can, start with just some basic ones like we see here: public, general, confidential, highly confidential. There's nothing saying you have to apply granular, protections immediately. It's just trying to get users in the habit of kind of, I guess, applying classifications, and then longer term you can act on that is the important thing. Access controls is a big one, and there's a whole heap you could cover here is the one, but I've touched upon some of it, but let's rock and roll with a few of the good ones. One of the most difficult ones, and we'll see what Zoe says here, but I think one of the worst ones out there is kind of going through your existing kind of permission set is the one. As you saw on the data that I pulled out previously, it can be a whole heap of kind of nastiness. Now, I'm hopeful that the team at SysKit might have an answer after we've spoken. I'm really hoping they do, because I don't fancy doing the 40,000 kind of unique permissions across a tenant. But I don't know, Zoe, you got any ones on this?
Yeah, I mean, so again, one of the things that I've seen kind of happen over the last year is, this is one of those things, like, organizations have this problem regardless of whether they've got Copilot or not. They had this problem before they got Copilot and started thinking about how easy Copilot would make it to find some of this information. But it's always just been in the too hard box, because you're completely right. When you've got loads of old content, where do you get started with that? But I've definitely started to see a trend with organizations realizing that they've got to get serious about this, and even if they find ways to segment some of this data and just, make some assumptions around what can be archived and moved out of easy access and that kind of thing. You can't just ignore this anymore, because even if you're not thinking about Copilot today, all of this generative AI stuff's not going anywhere. It is not going anywhere. You're going to have to deal with this at some point.
Yeah, and I think one of the key ones that picking up on the Copilot piece, that they've got these out-of-the-box wide scope permission groups, is what we'd call typically in SharePoint. We have the ability to share with everyone natively in SharePoint. So you can say, I want to share with everyone except external users, and people might not know that's there until you start delving into the kind of detail is the important thing. Another one Zoe called out very, very well was the kind of archival of redundant content is the one. So do we actually need this content? What can we do? I've called out retention labels and policies, like I'm pretty sure CIS mandate, and I know GDPR, is that we shouldn't keep data any longer than we absolutely need to is the one. So the ability to start looking at that and removing it is another key one. Sharing settings is a really cool one. I mean, by default, and I'm sure Microsoft love it, but they want you to be able to share with anyone and work with anyone, which is great. But you might want to have a look and change kind of what your default sharing settings are. One of the key ones that I would typically recommend is instead of sharing with everyone in the organization, we might ask a user, who do they want to share with? And really what we're doing there is making them take a conscious decision of who they want to share content with when they go to share it. And the longer term repercussions are whether you're sharing it with everyone or just the individuals you want is the one. Now, Zoe called this one out specifically as one. I did have it in there, but we kind of fine-tuned it as the one. And are there areas that we want to restrict completely off limits to Copilot? We can either exclude it at the SharePoint level, which was kind of the old traditional way, so you can exclude them from a SharePoint search, but we now have restricted SharePoint search is the one. And this kind of is an allow or deny list model of which SharePoint sites can participate in organization-wide search and Copilot experiences. There's a whole piece from Microsoft as to how you should get this list in a meaningful state. I think it's up to 100 sites is what you can do, and that's allow list, deny list, whatever it may be.
So again, I think if we look at this from the perspective of all of the feedback that Microsoft were getting about some of these security challenges, for me it feels like the restricted SharePoint search is almost a bit of a band-aid solution. And for organizations who've put a lot of effort into configuring things like Microsoft Search and Graph connectors, as soon as you start using restricted SharePoint search, you've basically broken all of that. So I think this is a short-term fix. It can help you figure out what you're doing, but
I was also reading the workarounds, and I don't think it, like you said, I don't think it applies across the board. This restricted site search is the one. It said it didn't work for, I think, across like global search or organizational words wide search. There was a number of limitations to it, so you might well be right on that one. And I think the other one I had specifically around access is probably your JML. It's more about users joining the organization, leaving the organization. How are people
those moving? It's the moves as well.
Yeah, the lateral movement. I got that one as well.
If someone completely moves their role, and again, this feels like something that ends up being in the too hard box for a lot of organizations.
I feel like it's Pokemon. You got to catch them all. At that point, you just keep accumulating more permissions over time. And no one really, if you, like you said, movers or lateral movement, they kind of just keep aggregating permissions infinitely is the one. So I think it's looking at that JML process and kind of how do we keep people's permissions in check to prevent them gaining access to too much stuff over time is the one. They should only really need what they are entitled to by their role. And speaking of entitlement, one of my favorite features that you can basically manage access on an ongoing basis is probably looking at entitlement management is the one. And this is really taking it to the next level in terms of managing access on an ongoing basis. If you wanted to start smaller, I would probably look at access reviews from Entra ID and just have a look and see how we can do it on a 365 group basis, a team basis, or a SharePoint site. We can basically have regular reviews of access and permissions to areas and have that basically evaluated by the business. You can apply machine learning to see who's actually using this and have it propose suggestions. This kind of takes it up to another level, and this is bundling areas together, or you can create access packages of multiple teams, applications, groups, sites, bundle them together, and basically, as you can see, we have a whole workflow on the right where basically a user request, we can approve the access, deny the access, and these are automatically provisioned into that access package. It will then basically do a continual review process, and they'll basically be removed after the business need ends. Now, again, that's helping look at that is really that JML piece and access to specific areas. Now, we can target this on internal users, which is probably more important for this scenario that we're looking at, but you can also use it for guests. But for Copilot, we probably want to focus on internal users and just making sure that people really only have access to what they need to is the one. And again, I'll call back to today's sponsor, which is Sysget, and we'll make sure, I'm hopeful that they have something to help with the ongoing access challenges in terms of permissions longer term. There was so many different kind of things that I could talk about from a security perspective, and I just kind of splattered down what I didn't have a chance to do a dedicated slide for. And I think some of the ones that I thought were interesting that I'd look at, certainly retention labels and policies, and basically how long data should live within your organization, what happens to it after a period of time. I don't know what you think on this one, Zoe, but I was thinking, I'm in two minds on this one. Communications compliance I saw as a suggested kind of tool that you could look at how your users are interacting with Copilot and see that one. But I also know there's a whole piece of adoption that I've seen in Viva, and I know you're better at Viva than me, so I don't know if you'd speak to that one in terms of how would you look at adoption for Copilot. I don't think communications compliance is the right avenue for that one. This one's more about looking at, I guess, offensive, and it's more about, as the name would suggest, compliance really, as opposed to adoption is the key that I'm doing. I think whack-a-mole tests is one that I got from Microsoft, and basically randomized search whack-a-mole tests to get a sense of what remaining oversharing is looking like. So say you've done all this hard work, the heavy lifting, you've tidied up your permissions. Why don't we do randomized tests to see what we still can see is the important thing. What might still be overshared. Another key one that I didn't really touch on, but say you've done all this hard work about tidying up permissions, you might want to look at who can actually create these areas in future to ensure that they have an understanding of how things should be shared and the process surrounding sharing. So you want people that are responsible, that are knowledgeable, that are spinning up these teams, or you need the appropriate governance guide rails in place to kind of support them to make sure that they don't make these mistakes is the important thing.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, and I was actually having a conversation this week about the responsibilities that people who are spinning up these spaces should have. So when we think about knowledge management or knowledge management on its own, or more specifically with Copilot, you don't just want to be able to find out everything. You want to be able to find things that are relevant and meaningful and up to date. So also, as well as restricting who can create the areas, also make sure that they actually understand their responsibility in terms of that lifecycle management as well. So, getting rid of content that's not needed anymore, getting rid of the area when it's not needed anymore, what that life cycle looks like, because if that stuff is no longer relevant, what you want to do is take it out of the index so that Copilot can't reason over it and surface it as the right answer anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I think I'll update the slide. I think it's probably the takeaway. It's the whole life cycle management. I think other key ones, data loss prevention. So say an oversharing incident happens. Typically, we're looking at data loss prevention for external sharing, but it can be used for internal sharing as well. So if things are overshared, we can basically protect users and have it automatically act on behalf of that. So say I share something with a whole heap of personally identifiable information, we can have data loss prevention automatically act and stop sharing or apply encryption to it. Auditing should be switched on and available to everyone, but one of the key things is you might want to do is make sure that the right people have access to that audit log. The final one was more classification, and sensitivity labels can also be applied to groups. So that's a team, that's a SharePoint site. We can also apply to those and have those kind of either inherit down, so you can have default sensitivity labels to your documents, or they can also make sharing settings changes to kind of sites and associated teams. So another great one to help look at. And once you've kind of got over, sensitivity labels for documents, the next place is probably trainable classifiers and have it automatically classify your content for users longer term. And that's kind of my high level pitch on what you should look at. So I think for me, the key takeaways, and sorry, just to go, I think it's probably this slide is where I'd look at, classify your data, look at your access controls are probably the two key pillars, and then thinking about how data comes into your organization, how it leaves, and where it is probably my key takeaways for security consideration for today. Cool.
Brilliant. Okay, so Copilot change enablement or adoption. Now, I've touched on this a little bit. I've talked about the fact that behavior change is hard. And one of the things that I've definitely observed in the last year is you can't just give people a Copilot license and expect them to know what to do with it. So if we remember the fact this is a premium license, so what that means is that if we're giving Copilot to someone, we want them to use it. We want them to use it to do things better, faster, more innovative, all of those really great things. But using Copilot is a choice. It's discretionary. If that individual can't find the way to use this that adds value to their life, then they just won't use it. And it's not one size fits all, which means that the way I manage my email, the way I run my meetings, the way I create, communicate, collaborate, it's going to be different from how Luke does it. Because I've developed, and I'm not saying anything about you here, Luke. I'm just saying the fact that we're different. We've got.
I'm happy to step in here because I'll be honest, I'll hold my hands up. I'm a bigger fan of GitHub Copilot is the one. So I hammer out a lot of time in code as opposed to maybe Zoe. So she's spot on here in terms of, not one size fits all is the thing.
Yeah, and when we think about the fact that if you think about what Copilot is, in its first iteration, it's a personal productivity tool. And yes, we'll be able to drive business value as we start to look at what's next. But ultimately, if I as an individual can't find the way that this is going to help me for the way that I work, then I'm just not going to use it. So when we first started this conversation, we had loads of people asking, like, what's the killer use case for finance, or what's the killer use case for HR? And whilst there are use cases or scenarios that might be relevant to that function, they won't apply to everybody, because you could have 5 people who do exactly the same job. They have the same roles, responsibilities, tasks, objectives, but the way that they work to achieve them will be different. So you could say, okay, to help you do this task, here's how you can use Copilot. But if that doesn't make sense to them with the way that their mind works and their workflow, they won't use it. So what this means is that, just giving someone a Copilot license and hoping for the best isn't actually going to drive the business results that we want. And what people actually need is support to build and train their Copilot muscle. So I like to describe this as like, training for a marathon or something like that. You can't go for a run once and think that you're marathon ready. For people to be able to start adopting Copilot in all of the many different ways and guises that you can use it, they need to build those habits, and building habits can be hard. It can take time. And that's where that 11-week, 11-minute tipping point comes from, because that's how long Microsoft have seen that it takes people to build the habits to free up 11 minutes of their time. So people need to build and train their Copilot muscle. And when we think about that, that AI first, people first AI strategy, it's really important to remember that adopting Copilot isn't like any other product. And what I mean by that is, if I go to a company and they want help rolling out Microsoft Teams for next gen collaboration, or whatever you might want to call that, we know what that looks like. We know what good practice or best practice looks like, and we can go and deliver a change program where we can say, okay, we're going to implement this technology for you. This is how you're going to work in the end. This is what's going to change for you. This is what's in it for you. Whereas with Copilot, we don't necessarily know all of that. We're still at the start of this journey, and it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So it's important to remember that adopting Copilot is a little bit different, because what we need to do is help people understand how to use it, and then support them in developing the growth mindset and being able to experiment and try things, and creating that culture of knowledge sharing and collaboration that will help people learn and experiment together. And we need to help people build that muscle. So putting in place, the different kinds of training and support that people might need to help them to develop these consistent habits. Remembering as well that not everybody learns the same way. For some people, they might want to come to an office hours or a drop-in where they can ask questions and share. Other people might want bite-sized videos, or posts in Viva Engage or something like that. And for people who are neurodivergent, they might need a completely different approach as well, because one of the things that we found with our neurodivergent population was trying to drive the adoption in the same way that we did for everybody else was just information overload for them. It was too much information to process. So helping people understand this is a journey, and that kind of consistent and repeated learning to push them towards those positive habits. Anything to add on to that, Luke?
No, I mean, I'll leave. That's your area of expertise, so I'm staying well away.
Okay then, so that's a little bit about kind of what we've seen, what we've learned, the things that we can do now to help secure your environment for Copilot. But when we think about what comes next, so when I look at the organizations that have been really successful with Copilot over the last 12 months, there are some things that are true for all of them. So when we look at the foundations, they've typically got what we call a strong digital core. So they'll be in M365. Most of their stuff is going to be in M365 as well. They'll have a level of data governance in there. They'll have a reasonable level of existing adoption. When we look at things like the Power Platform, they might have the Centre of Excellence or Centre of Enablement in place to drive some of that low code, which is important when you start to look at Copilot Studio and extensibility. From a people perspective, when we look at the things that the things that tend to be true in those who've been able to move quickly, they recognize that this isn't just kind of turn it on and let people at it, but they actually need to put the effort into changing the mindset and the habits and behaviors of people. They have that culture of growth mindset, and they've got an understanding of the role that Copilot will play in their strategy as an organization, and they recognize that it might take time to get this right, but they really see it playing a key role in their market advantage, and them being able to be more competitive and having that innovation culture. And then when we look at strategy, so some of those first mover organizations, they understand what their Gen AI strategy is. Lots of them might have a Gen AI council. Copilot will be one work stream as part of that, or at the very least they'll be able to articulate what it is they're trying to do with Copilot. And for some organizations, when I've talked to them, their view is that it's a really important part of their employee value proposition. They want to be a really interesting, exciting place for people to work. They think this is going to make their employees happy and more effective, and that will have a positive impact on their business. There are others where they want to be, they might be struggling to hire, like public sector. They struggle to hire, their salaries aren't as high, so they actually feel like this will help them do more without necessarily having the people. Other organizations, they see this as driving at cost optimization or efficiencies or whatever that might be. They at least have a starting point where they think this will help them. And they've got leadership buy-in. This isn't an IT project. This is a business project driving business outcomes, and it needs to have a business sponsor that sits outside of IT. I've worked with some clients where this is an IT project, and what happens is you get a load of techies sitting in IT who just give the licenses to their colleagues, and they all sit there grumbling and complaining about the fact that it's not accurate and it doesn't do this and there's this issue and that issue, and they just find all of these excuses why they can't roll it out. Whereas if you've got the right business sponsor, they understand that this is a journey, and that we need to get it into the hands of the people in the business who can find the ways to solve their problems. And me, as someone working in IT, I don't know what all of those innovative things are yet. I don't do all of those other jobs. So we need to get this in the hands of the people who do, so they can start to figure out how to do things differently.
And I think for my stuff, it really sits in here, and the foundational elements is the one in terms of getting your data governance on order, adoption, strong digital core. I think those are the ones. And Zoe, is this the one that you're talking about? All the techies sat together using the licenses and the technical pilot?
Yeah.
Is that what you're calling out?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I can usually tell whether a project will be successful or not by how quickly we can get from step 1 to step 2 in this diagram. So when we think about that roadmap to business value, we need to start with a technical pilot. And that's primarily because we need to understand, are there things in that particular environment that mean that this isn't going to work as well, things that we need to fix and remediate. But we need to get it in the hands of the business as quickly as possible after that, because that's where the real innovation is going to come from. And as people start using it, there needs to be a way to capture the value like within an organization, there will be some groups who will find this more valuable than others. So when we start to plan how to drive an at-scale deployment, it's really important to be able to prioritize who's going to get the value, or identify people where it just doesn't even make sense. So being able to measure and capture that value, being able to drive that adoption. And then the bit for me that gets really interesting is being able to extend beyond Microsoft 365, being able to integrate with other systems. And if we just move to the last slide. So, if we think about this, as a journey. Essentially, getting Copilot into the hands of people is that quickest, easiest, safest way to get Gen AI into the hands of the masses. And what that will do is it will drive broad personal productivity benefits. But as we move up this value chain, we can start to move beyond Copilot for M365 into the functional or role-based Copilots like Copilot for Service, Copilot for Sales. And what that starts to do is it starts to integrate M365 Copilot into specific line of business systems for a specific persona, with the view of helping them do their actual job better. So helping them respond to customer queries faster, responding to those tickets and things like that come in much more quickly and more accurately as well, or being able to do the sales admin stuff more effectively so that sellers get more time with clients. And then where Copilot out of the box can't do certain things, being able to extend that into other lines of business systems. So either being able to allow Copilot to reason over a bigger set of data from an index perspective, or allowing it to take action in other systems so that I as a user can sit in Copilot and I can ask questions and pull data from other back-end systems like back-end HR systems, or whatever that might be. And then for those things that can't be achieved out of the box or by extending, then you can start to develop custom Copilots for those high value, highly bespoke use cases. But I see this as a definite journey. You need to kind of get the foundations in place first and then start to understand what this broader strategy looks like. And I know that there are lots of organizations that kind of went straight to custom Copilots because the Azure OpenAI service was available first. And what's happened is we've got loads of stuff that are stuck in proof of concept. Some things have kind of scaled, but essentially it's created a lot of technical debt for things that will land in Copilot anyway. So for me, I think understanding Copilot, starting with the basics and then extending into the more complex and custom has to be the strategy for how to drive business value in a way that's kind of really safe and sustainable.
Awesome. Thanks for the carry, Zoe. Appreciate it. Thank you for bringing it home. That was it for today's session. I'm hopeful that it offered some valuable insights into kind of where we are today, a year on from our last session. Any questions, as I mentioned, please feel free to chuck them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. Thanks a ton, guys.
Thank you, Zoe, and look for the awesome presentation. Again, like Luke said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We already have a bunch of awesome questions in there. So please add any question you might have. But for now, let's give both our awesome presenters a quick break and let Carlo show us how SysKit can help you get Copilot ready. Carlo, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Vlad. It was exciting to hear all of these things that Zoe and Luke were talking about, especially when Luke mentioned that we hopefully have something to present today that can help with preparing for Copilot, right? So we'll dive straight into how SysKit can address some of these major challenges that the introduction of Copilot poses. Just as a reminder, SysKit is an integrated and scalable platform which makes M365 end-to-end management and governance easier for you, but also for all of your business users, and we'll see the value of that in a bit. So you're probably here today because you're either thinking about introducing Copilot and want to prep for it, or you're already piloting it and have recognized the potential downsides for your organization. So we're not in the business of discouraging any collaboration. As a matter of fact, we're here to amplify it. And that's why SysKit is finding ways to allow you to, number one, prepare for Copilot, but also to stay Copilot ready through some of those continuous practices that Luke mentioned earlier. Okay, so let's start with how do we prepare for Copilot? So we'll focus on our home screen, specifically on our dashboard, and this Copilot readiness tile. So addressing oversharing, right, which we've been talking about today as one of the top hurdles to uncontrolled Copilot introduction, is something that we've been navigating for a while here at SysKit, right? So you can do exactly that type of control through this tile. We've highlighted some of the most critical portions that we want to focus on, but there are additional ones. Today, I'm going to just show some of the top ones. So if we start, for example, with those top-down restrictions, one of the first things we flagged in Syscape Point for you to see at a glance here are all those private workspaces that are typically shared with those large security groups. So those everyone except external users, all users, right? You can directly navigate here and drill down and see exactly what those workspaces are that are potentially being overshared with those very, very large groups. You can here acknowledge their presence in any of these resources, or you can just directly remove them. Now, what we've done is taken this a step further, and instead of just making it kind of a manual cleanup grid, we've also enabled this as an automated action, where anytime one of these large groups is added to workspaces, you can immediately automatically kick them out. And that's one of the ways you're kind of safeguarding all the content that's present in those private workspaces. Okay. The next ones are these two that I'm going to highlight. The first policy has to do with workspaces with too many members. So we allow you to set up some sort of a healthy upper threshold of what you consider, the upper number of too many members. And then Syscape Point recognizes all the workspaces that are going and exceeding that number. And that probably will prompt you to occasionally go in here and check why that is. What is the membership, right? And do I actually want to, once again, acknowledge it or deal with it? If we want to get even more granular, we can focus on workspaces. So here, I mean all of our teams, sites, etc. So workspaces with shadow users. So shadow users are essentially all of those non-member users that are somehow present in the context of a workspace. That means that if they've established that permission access, they can actually see that content, right? And once again, we want you to be able to, at a glance, see all those workspaces, navigate to them, right? And view who those users are. And not just to view who those users are, but also to be able to identify whether these are internal users, whether they're part of some sort of a security group, such as this one right here, or whether they're external users, such as Howard right here. So really powerful stuff, and we're constantly getting creative about these ways of allowing you for more control for oversharing. I'll finalize this portion by highlighting sharing links, right? We all are aware of anonymous links and the potential dangers that they present, but also we decided to focus on company-wide links that are present in private teams. Once again, these potentially expose the content of those private teams across the organization. And once again, if we're talking about those kind of bulk action cleanups and establishing new, healthier baselines, right here, for example, we can come here. We can only focus on the ones that are labeled through those sensitivity labels. We can pick the confidential ones. And once again, in bulk, I can remove all of these sharing links and establish a new, healthier baseline across the board, right? So this has to do with that initial cleanup, and it's always going to be here on your dashboard so you can keep track of it. But we also deal with some continuous governance and compliance practices that you can introduce, right? So part of the answer of what's our take on that control is by doing delegated control. And the first policy I'm going to show you is the access review policy. Think of this as an automated delegation of the occasional review to the business user who's an owner of a team, of a site. They are then guided, let's say every month, every quarter, they're guided through a simple 4-step wizard that's really created even for non-SharePoint people, non-SharePoint experts. We want to empower actual business users to deal with this. So they can review the membership that they're dealing with within their resource, within their team, and then they can deal with the wider sharing and see a full list of users that their workspace is exposed to. Once again, they can expand on this and see, okay, I have this external user, Howard Hunter, and I can see he's present here via this security group. And I can either remove Howard directly from here, or I can dive into my content view and just remove Howard from the context of a particular library, folder, etc. Finally, in terms of those continuous practices, how can we maintain relevant content within our tenant for Copilot? Well, our take on that is one is our lifecycle management policy, which essentially allows you to set up your own threshold, your own parameter of what you consider inactive content. And after Siskit Point recognizes that, so here in my dummy example, I have 365 days. After that many days, it's going to send out one of these automated messages to that business owner and say, hey, this is probably stale. It's not being used. What would you like to do? Do you want to keep, archive, or delete it? Again, one of the biggest answers we have to this question of how to centrally control and prepare everything for Copilot, well, we have a couple of tricks, but we also want you to delegate this to your business users because they're at the source of this information and they are fully aware of who they need to have present within their workspaces. Now, to find out more about this, you can reach out directly to sales@siskit.com or simply go to our website and start one of our 21-day free trials. Check it out for yourself and reach out to our team if you have any questions. Regarding today's questions, I would be happy to hand it over to Vlad to tell us if we had any engagement, if people are interested in any of the content we talked about today. So thank you, team. Once again, lovely presentation, Zoe and Luke. It was really, really interesting to kind of see that balance of both functional and technical. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo, for the excellent presentation. Zoe, Luke, you have a ton of amazing questions. I did try to answer some of them, but there's some that that are going to be tough here. Let me start with some amazing adoption and analytics question by Krishna. So how can we identify users that have a Copilot license but are not using the features? I know you did mention the Viva Insights dashboard, but there's a specific question. Is there any Power BI template, or can we kind of get some customized analytics that we can build and just have access to the raw data behind to build our own reports?
Yeah, so I think I can see the look on Luke's face. I think he's going to let me take this one. So, so for me, I mean, I'd start with the Viva dashboard. So up until fairly recently, you actually needed to have a Viva Insights premium license to be able to use the Copilot dashboard. But Microsoft have recently changed the licensing requirements, and they've made that available to anyone who has sufficient Copilot licenses. I don't know whether this is coming to the M365 usage analytics dashboard yet, which is kind of, you know, that was always my go-to for some of the usage analytics reports. But to be honest, one of the things that I've seen with clients is that even if you've got Viva Insights Premium, it still doesn't typically give you the level of granular insight into what people are doing with it, how they're using it. You know, it's just like, this person used Copilot in Teams in the last month, or you know, they in the last week or something like that. So it's not really giving you the granular information, because I can go use Copilot in Teams once. It doesn't mean that I'm using it to actually drive real business value. You know, so I do still think there's a little bit of a gap, but that dashboard's definitely a really good starting point.
Awesome. Okay, let me switch over now. I'll try and switch between strategy and adoption and technical questions. So how can I apply a retention policy to Microsoft Copilot chat files stored in OneDrive?
Oh my gosh, I have a feeling this is just me thinking about it. So if it's in your OneDrive, we will be able to find it. And I think there's a way, and you have to stop me if I get it wrong, but I swear there was a way of looking at a way we can use like a graph query. We can use a query to identify those files, and I think it might be programmatic. I'm not sure if adaptive scopes and retention policies would work on this scenario at the moment, but I think, what am I thinking here? I'm thinking we could do a query and apply them programmatically. I just wonder if we can do it using, so that's the initial one, and I'm retention label defined. I don't think you need any of the metered API access to graph. That'd be the way I'd look to do it. I don't know if there's a way of doing it in adaptive scopes in retention at the moment. So my quick and easy cop out would be I would do it programmatically is the one, and use Graph API. I don't think I have. I'd have to double check. I can always look afterwards if we can do it out of the box, as it were.
Awesome. Okay, based on what you know today, and this is from Dario, by the way, thanks for the question. Based on what you know today, what would you do differently compared to what you did a year ago in terms of deployment or adoption? So if you had one main lesson learned, what would it be?
I mean, just
So,
before
go on.
I did have I was going to hand this one to Zoe, but I'd love to know if Dario's what his last name was is the thing, because I don't know if he's left it. I'd be interested just out of curiosity's sake. But Zoe, you go for it.
Yeah, if it's the Dario that Luke and I know. Hi, Dario.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So actually, the thing that so this is something we've changed in the last year, because we learned really quickly that approaching Copilot for M365 from the perspective of use cases just doesn't work. Like I said during the presentation, everyone wanted to know what are the use cases for finance or HR or marketing or anything like that. What we found was that you need to get out of that mindset. You just need to get Copilot licenses into the hands of those people in those teams, help them understand how to use it, and then work with them to identify and capture that business value. And pivoting the way that we did this in that way allowed us to move much more quickly, and to really kind of accelerate people's understanding. So that's definitely a key learning that I'd recommend people apply.
For me, I mean, mine's pretty simple. I'd look at it from a technology perspective. For me, it's more about the data governance piece, really, because when we're getting into it first, we didn't really understand exactly what you wanted to do or how you wanted to look at. What are the key technical areas? I think I've laid out some of them that I do differently. These are the things I would look at first and foremost to get going.
Awesome. Okay, let's move on to a question from Chris. And if somebody has delegate access to another person's mailbox, if they ask a question regarding their colleague's mailbox, will Copilot serve up answers about it? That's a really great question. I never thought about it, but really curious on that one.
If I'm honest,
I don't believe it will. Yeah, I don't believe it will.
You don't think so?
No, I need to test it. My understanding is that when the kind of user level index runs, it's running on your mailbox.
Okay.
So I wouldn't expect it to be picking up things from another mailbox.
I was going to go the other side, is the one. I was going to say you have read access or whatever delegate level of permission. I was looking at it from a permission standpoint, and I thought it'd probably run under that and pull it from there. I don't actually know the answer. I'm speculating is the one.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do for this one, because I'm actually really curious on this one. I think I'm going to try it. I do have a tenant with multiple Copilot licenses in which I have a bunch of me, myself, and I that I can test with. So I think this will be a really interesting one to follow up after once we test it.
I want to know who wins, really, Vlad. Is it myself or Zoe? Is the question. Who's got it right?
Well, one way to find out. We're going Copilot Mythbusters.
So my understanding is that it's, and I did just do a very quick search in the background. So Copilot scenarios in Outlook are restricted to a user's primary mailbox, and it doesn't work on shared mailboxes, group mailboxes, or delegate access.
You got me there then. What can I do?
Yep, that settles it then. That was busted. Okay, question from Gianni. What do you recommend is required to drive successful adoption of Copilot? What skills are required, and what resources do you recommend? We're an organization of 10,000 active M365 users, and we think that we will start with 25% with Copilot. So what do we need from an adoption perspective? Should we get external consulting? Should we only do it internally? We're trying to judge what resources we need for this project.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. Now, I can't really answer the kind of, do you do it internally versus do you do it with external consultants? Because I obviously work for a consultancy that does that for clients. So there might be a little bit of bias in that. I think the more important question is, do you actually have the right skills within your organization? So how do you normally approach rolling out technology projects? Do you have people who operate in that kind of change management capacity? because there needs to be kind of a really clear, structured, programmatic way to driving change enablement, and it needs to start before the user gets their license in how you educate and communicate with them that this is coming, in the sessions that you run from them, the resources that you make available to them. As with kind of SharePoint adoption projects, having a champions network is really key. Finding people in different teams and departments who can be the super users, who can really kind of champion and role model this. Thinking about things like prompt libraries, how are you going to capture wins and really good examples and just create that kind of community of knowledge sharing and collaboration. But don't kind of underestimate the effort that's needed to make this successful, because one of the things that we've seen is that if you don't sustain and repeat the messages to people, what tends to happen is that they'll start to gradually slip back into their old habits. Again, thinking about training for a marathon, if you don't keep going for a run, you're not going to be match ready anymore. So we need to kind of think about how we sustain that. And then it's not just about getting people to understand how to start using it, but the product is changing so much. Microsoft are making like improvements. There are things that I couldn't do a month ago that I can do today. So thinking back to the team as example that I gave, it's not just a case of saying you can do this thing, here's a prompt, off you go. It's about creating that mindset where people are open to going back and experimenting and trying new things.
Awesome. Excellent answer. I think you covered everything. Okay, next up from Tiago. When you say that we should archive all content that is sitting in a SharePoint site, what exactly does that mean in practical terms?
So, I mean, for me, it's really, there's a few different options. I mean, sorry, tell me if I get it wrong, but we've got new functionality in 365 to enable us to archive things and move them off basically primary storage. So you can use that. But I'm just thinking, would that still be
that's only on a site by site basis though. So correct, if you use SharePoint Premium, you need to archive a site.
But is that still going to be picked up in the semantic index if we offload it into that? Is the one. So that's what I think it means in a practical sense. So if you need, I think there's a decision to be made from a data governance perspective. Do you need to retain the content, or can it? If you do need to retain it, then archive it or use retention policies, or do you just delete it and remove it as the one and save yourself some costs? So I would probably make a decision tree as to whether we need to retain the information or do we just purge it. If we do need to retain it, do you want to use the archive functionality or the retention policies that will have an impact on your overall tenant storage? Or you can offload that using the archive functionality that's built into, I think, Syntax now is the one, and save yourself some money that way. So if you do need to keep it, we can archive it off and use that. So practically, I think it's the archive functionality that just came, the backup came GA, but this was a bit before that, archive functionality, or just delete is really what it means in practical terms.
Awesome.
Okay. Sorry. I was going to say the key is probably to get it out of the index, really, is what we're aiming to do from a practical standpoint.
Awesome. Okay, now this one I can't wait to get your answers, both of you, on. Question from Mark. For an organization that fixed a profile of over-permissioned identities, over-shared resources, and has no data classification, ownership, or lifecycle, what would your reaction be to a business request to turn on Copilot tomorrow?
I'd recommend that you use restricted SharePoint search. Like I said earlier, I feel like it's a band-aid solution, but if it's a mess, start with restricted SharePoint search, tightly scope what Copilot has access to, and start like that while you get the stuff over here in order.
Yeah, exactly. Go for an allow list approach, and they offer some great guidance around how do I know which sites I want to include. I think there's got some fantastic abbreviations. I think it's like SCAD, or it's basically, there's a whole bunch of reports in the SharePoint Admin Center. I'd go and look and see what are the sites that people use the most, what are the most popular, and what does the sharing look like, and build your allow list from there. And then you can slowly, gradually allow more and more sites in, is the one. In terms of classification, if you've got nothing today, what would I recommend? I think, like I said, start small. You may start with 1 or 2 labels, at least get the kind of practice out there. You can always add more labels later down the line. There's a whole bunch of guidance. If you're in the UK, I'm sure for each regional or country, they'll have their own classification schemes from a government or from a regional body. You can start with something small and scale it up over time. So it doesn't necessarily have to have, sensitive or encryption restrictions, any of that jazz turned on from the get-go. It's just the simple tagging of your content really is all we're looking to do. You can default that across libraries, so people adding them can automatically get it. So if you know what an area is about, we can look to use that. If you've got some of the fancier stuff in E5, then go nuts. Start using trainable classifiers. You can start teaching it what documents for your organization look like for your organization, and it can basically classify them on behalf of your users. You can also use automatic sensitivity labeling is another one, not just trainable classifiers, but I think there's rule-based logic as well that you can use on that one as well. So like regex, dictionary, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff you can use, but that's slightly more complicated. So I like the trainable classifiers to keep it easy. In terms of, let's think, sorry, I'll go for one more on this one. In terms of access management, look at access reviews, look at the Entra ID governance suite, or look at our good friends Syskit here is the other one. You want like something to kind of manage permissions. I like I'm coming from an OS purist perspective. If you have access to some of the nice Entra ID governance suite, then make use of it is the one. If you don't, then go look at Syskit and co.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I know we are 15 minutes over time and almost nobody left the webinar. So we know you did an amazing job when everybody's still here 15 minutes after. We'll take one more question. There's still more in the chat, but what we're gonna do, we're gonna create a follow-up blog post where we answer all of them and we'll email it to everybody. But one more question which just came in, which is super interesting. So today we've seen on The Verge and many other news sites that Microsoft is doing a Wave 2 Copilot announcement event on September 16th. So in just about 2 weeks from now. So the question is, what do you expect or know will come on that event? And Lars, I'll tell you right away, we want to keep our MVPs, I think all of us, so we cannot tell you anything we know. So the least we know, the more we can actually tell you because we can guess. But the more we know, we cannot tell you that part. So in order to keep my NDA, I'll just let Zoe and Luke answer this one. It's easier like that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So there's only one thing that I'll say about this, apart from make sure you tune in or keep an eye out for the blogs, and that is the thing that I noticed is they've renamed the product again because it's the Microsoft 365 Copilot Wave 2 event instead of the Copilot for Microsoft 365. So I haven't actually seen them say publicly yet that they've renamed it, but if they're putting it in the marketing, I actually think that they're going to tell us they've renamed the product at that event. So big job for me to go and update all of my content and stuff, but we know how much Microsoft love a rename.
Yeah. I'm just going to stay tuned.
New stickers with a new name, yay.
Yeah, but, I mean, if I think about what I'd like to see, for me, I said that the extensibility stuff is where it gets really interesting because this is where we get out of the basics and into the real value. So I'm hoping that we see some stuff about agents and kind of more direction around what you can do with extensibility and integration, but who knows?
I'd love some of the stuff that I've mentioned to be kind of more automation around it would be fantastic in terms of, maybe a more guided walkthrough. Some of the stuff I've called out, how can we better access the data and how can we better implement access controls, sensitive data, and so forth is the one. So that would be awesome to me.
I mean, I'd love Copilot to be cheaper, but I know that's not going to happen. So I can say that, right? I mean, you never know.
I mean, if the answer is to pay Microsoft more money, that's typically what I would say is the correct answer for an exam, at least. That's usually the one.
But Zoe, Luke, once again, thank you for the awesome presentation today. It was amazing. So much knowledge shared. And for everybody, thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. We really, really hope you have enjoyed. And like I said, I know there's some questions in the chat we didn't get to What we'll do is we'll compile them, do a nice blog post, and I'll make sure to send it to Zoe and look for review to make sure I don't put any incorrect answers in there. And we'll make sure to send it to you as well, together with the recording for the webinar. If you have any questions about Syskit-Point, please reach out to us, sales@syskit.com. And it was a pleasure having you all here, and see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Bye now. Thank you.